Welcome to the Real Thomas Jefferson, episode 14. Tonight, we'll be doing a critical appraisal of Ken Burns's Thomas Jefferson. But first, I'd like to give you Dr. Holochek's credentials. Welcome, Dr. Holochek.
Little Jeff here.
Oh, little Jeffy. Hi, Jeffy. He heard my voice. Hi, Jeffy. Oh, I can't wait. I hope someday I get to hug him and give him kisses. He's so cute.
Got a
And then
good
I can
nickname?
say I kissed Jefferson.
Let's
Oh no,
see.
then we can start rumors about me too.
Ugly rumors.
Oh gosh, well, thank you so much for joining us and bringing your expertise to the table. And that's what I'd like to share with everyone. Dr. Holochek is a PhD professor of philosophy and history, the most perfect combination there can be, who taught at institutions such as University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, Rutgers University, Camden, and Ohio University. And he has over 27 published books. And I'd like to congratulate you on your 2 new books. Can you tell us a little bit about them before we start?
Yeah, I'll bring them up, I guess. Here's the first one. Thomas Jefferson, Maria Cosway, Gordian Love Affair. It's the complete correspondence, and I offer a critical commentary. I love this book. I love the cover. I love my commentary. Um, I try to show in this book, and I think I do quite effectively, that Maria Cosway, Jefferson falls irredeemably in love with this young lady when he goes to Paris and he meets her in 1786. And then she doesn't requite his affection at the time. But in years later, if you examine the correspondence closely, it seems that she longs for Jefferson in her retiring years, in her reclining years. That's that book. I will bring up another.
That sounds like it would make a great Valentine's Day
It
gift.
would make a great movie. It would make.
Oh, a movie.
She's also a Catholic. I grew up Catholic, and you you know how that can be sometimes, because there's always a lot of tension with sinning and wanting to live life. She was a bit of a bon vivant, and she was a bit of a sinner at the same time. So I go over that, and I actually study her artwork. She's a great artist. This one just came out this week, and I just finished the index early. It's called The Disease of Liberty. And we'll be able to talk about that a little bit today because it has a bearing on the Ken Burns film. So maybe I'll bring that up a little bit later. But I'm proud of both of those books. And Vernon Press did such a remarkable job on the covers. I think they're very, very attractive covers.
And yes, I was just going to comment on the cover of your Disease of Liberty. My student in U.S. history used a similar picture for a web page we're co-creating together for a project.
Well, they do a great job with
yeah, and I loved it.
And they put up with me as an individual. I'm not easy to put up with, especially when they suggest edits, and I get really difficult at that time. Let's put it that way.
Oh, is that the only time you get difficult?
Not the only time at all. You need to make this edit. Hell no! If I make that edit, I'm withdrawing my book. That's it, But I mean, they put up with me, so I'm so happy with that.
Oh, I'm glad I'm not a publisher.
Well, there's a point, at which when you do what you're doing and you know it very well. One thing that always irks me is that when people say, you didn't include discussion of this book, and my thing is, well, that was really a bad book. It doesn't need discussion, or it's not relevant to my thesis. So why do I have to include it just to show that I read it when it's not relevant? Relevance is very important. And that's done all too often by publishers and other people.
I think that's a good segue into what we'll discuss today.
Yeah, it is. We'll tie that in. Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. Jeffy's a little helping at the bit here.
Oh, Jeffy. I'm going to come steal him. I'm going to come steal Jeffy one of these days. We were contacted by a viewer of our series, The Real Thomas Jefferson, concerning critical discussion of Ken Burns's 1997 series on Thomas Jefferson. The viewer asked if Dr. Holochek and I would watch and review the documentary. So here we are, and that is what we're doing today. The question we aim to answer in this episode is, does Burns give us a depiction of the real Thomas Jefferson? And with Dr. Holacek's experience, how many books have you written on Jefferson? Are those the 29 or all
I have
Jefferson?
29, two that aren't published yet. And then I want to do the one on John Adams and Jefferson correspondence, the philosophical correspondence. I'm sort of chomping at the bit to start that. But I'm also working on a book on Ukraine.
Okay.
Steps to nationhood. And I have to do a lot of research on that because it's not my field. I'm a Ukrainian and I love writing on it, but so there's so much reading I have to do, and I'm in the process of doing that. Right. Anyways, I guess we'll go to question one.
Well, I'm Donna Vitek, and this is The Real Thomas Jefferson, episode 14. Okay, so we're going to start with my first question that I have. With your overall impression of the documentary, can you give me a rating from 1 to 5 stars?
Yeah, I'd probably give it a 4.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a lot in there that was just misleading, but when you look at any attempts at documentaries, they're so pathetically bad, all focusing on the hypocrisy and racism. This one does a lot of that in places, and I think that mars it, and I'll discuss that in a bit. But
yeah.
And the other thing is Burns he's writing a documentary, but he's also trying to get an audience. He's trying to, you need to make money when you write a documentary. So there's all sorts of spooky stuff. You've got mist and fog and nighttime scenes, everything. And the whole notion here is what scholars often do, which always annoys the hell out of me. Jefferson was baffling. I get verhoodled. You'll get verhoodled if you try to understand what he's doing. He was a series of contradictions as a person. I never understand that because a contradiction is a contradiction are two statements, one of which is the complete denial of the other. Like I'm saying, it's sunny outside in Lynchburg, and at the same time, it's not sunny outside. And a person can't be a contradiction. A contradiction applies to sentences. So another misuse of language.
I think with people, we all have ideas and thoughts about things, but they can't always apply because every situation is different. So there may be times where I may have contradictory ideas, thoughts, statements, but because each person is so different, what I'm saying may apply in a relationship with one person, but may not apply with another.
Yeah, I tend to think, Piaget and other cognitive psychologists, people do harbor inconsistencies and contradictions, but they're short-lived because if I have, like God exists and God doesn't exist, I can't go on entertaining both as true. Both can't be true. So at some point, I will live in such a way to try to reconcile my misunderstanding, right? I might adopt skepticism, but in the short term, and say I really don't know in my search. But that's what people generally do. They're not contradictory. Right. They tend not to hold contradictory beliefs and hold both as true, but they might be entertaining, holding in their head contradictory views.
A long-term entertaining until you have enough evidence to
discern.
Right. To go one way or the other, you may stay in the middle. We all ride the fence on a lot of things at times.
Yeah, riding a fence doesn't make it a contradiction. So, I mean, that's one of the things that annoyed me is that just every biographer does that with Thomas Jefferson. He's a baffling series of contradictions, complete ravelment in his brain, tangled confusion. He wasn't confused in the least. It's the scholars trying to ascertain Jefferson's brilliant mind, the vast knowledge that he had, the depth of knowledge. The scholars are confused. Jefferson wasn't. I'll try to show that as we go on. Anyways,
I do agree. What one person did make the comment that he is the conceiving spirit of the country. I thought that was a nice statement.
Yes, I think so. I think what makes Jefferson so attractive is that he really does, more than any figure in American history, embody what America was. And I'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay.
George Will says that. I did have something to talk about what they wanted to do, but overall the series was quite good. As the unraveling of Jefferson's life, the things that he did was in the main right on the money, and it was good. It gave a general good idea of the depth of this person's intelligence, the breadth of his understanding. You know how that he was interested in so many different things.
Maybe I just had an idea. Maybe you ought to contact Mr. Burns, send him your book, the love affair between Thomas Jefferson and Maria Causeway, and maybe you guys can you can be the consultant for a mini series.
I don't know if there's enough information. You probably could do a mini documentary on Jefferson Maria Causeway. Her life was really quite interesting.
Or even something
with all these big shots, the difficulty is trying to contact them. And you know, I've done that with other people about ideas, and they never get back with you. So, anyways,
okay, yeah, viewers, it's up to our viewing team now. Everybody contact Mr. Burns and and ask him to consult with Dr. Holacek on a mini series on the love affair.
Maybe all right. I mean, I didn't really do much. Like I said, I'd probably give it a 4. 3.8 or 4. And the points that are took off, you know, from 5 are due to insipid and rather stupid comments by some of the commentators who were interviewed in the process. We'll get to that as we go on.
Okay. Question number 2. What about the various experts whose opinions were showcased on the documentary? Can you give me a little rundown on what you thought of each of them?
I mean, I'll just say bare bones here.
Okay.
Andrew Burstein, who's a friend of mine, he's a history professor. He studied under Peter Onuf, and he somehow survived. He's a likable fellow. He's ingenuous, honest, sincere. He was the young fella who he started the documentary with my favorite story about Thomas Jefferson, if it actually is true. Jefferson is traveling on the road to Ford's Tavern. You've seen that. And he sups at night in the tavern with a clergyman. And the clergyman, they start talking about agriculture. If I remember the story correctly, start talking about agriculture, and the clergyman in his mind thinks, well, this guy's a high-level farmer. He knows a lot about farming and stuff, so he's very interested. And then they go on to talk about mathematics and things that relate to engineering. He goes, well, no, he's an engineer of some sort. And the conversation turns to religion. And he goes, darned if this guy isn't a man of the cloth like I am. And, Jefferson reclines, and the clergyman talks to the tavern owner the next morning, and he says, who was that person with whom I was speaking? He goes, you don't know that was Thomas Jefferson? The guy was astonished that Thomas, and I like the story. It may not be true. I suggest it is. Because it's consistent with Jefferson. I like the story so much because it shows Jefferson preferred to dine with someone. 1, he was sociable, gregarious. Number 2, he could have, no one's ever said this, he could have just introduced himself as Thomas Jefferson, and the person would have taken, said, oh, I'm sitting with Thomas Jefferson. And that would have made the conversation unequal. Jefferson didn't do that, And so he just enjoys. So those two things are, to me, sort of interesting. And the fact that Jefferson doesn't introduce himself as Thomas Jefferson, I think, is telling and consistent with his personality. So Burstein, I think, did a really good job. He had just published a book on the inner Jefferson, Jefferson's home life, which is a pretty good book. Joe Ellis, his commentary, we'll get into it later, was a bit of a mixed bag. He's got some intelligent things to say, then he says some rather stupid things. He likes to dwell on Jefferson, the contradiction. Clay Jenkinson, who was an actor, writes a few books on history and stuff. Don't know that he was trained in history at all, but he was a mixed bag as well. He made some intelligent comments and then some stupid claims as well. Gore Vidal, everybody knows him or heard of him. He was a literary figure, a witticist of his time. I don't know if he's still alive, probably not. Political commentator. and intelligent person. I don't know that he added much, because from what he added didn't show that he had much familiarity with Jefferson's writings. John Hope Franklin is a Black historian, and his participation there was basically to show that Jefferson was, inconsistent, racist, and a bigot, and whatever. The last two people blew me away. George Will, I'll talk about him. I've always liked George Will, highly intelligent man who can say things brachylogiously, succinctly, and beautifully, and get at the gist of what's going on. I'll talk about him in a bit. And then Natalie Bober, who's a historian, and I'm unfamiliar with her. I looked her up. She has 2 books on Jefferson. She's written a few books. She's passed away. She had some very nice things to say that I thought were, we'll talk about as we get on. So there are a couple other people not really relevant, but overall is a sort of mixed bag. And Paul Finkelman was in there. Finkelman hates Jefferson more than any person in the world. If you just pick up any one of his papers on Jefferson, it's filled with he's a hypocrite, racist, and not one of my favorite people. So,
I thought the one you were going back and forth with on education was the one hated him a lot. I forget his name.
I'm not sure who you're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Did I talk about him? Clay Jenkinson, maybe. We'll talk about that. We'll go into some particulars, but it's a rough idea of the participants. There's a sort of mixed bag, running the gamut of all sorts of people that favorable impressions, people that dislike him. And
I wish we could have Mr. Burns on our show to ask how he selected and why he selected the historians he selected.
Yeah, Peter Onuf was the Thomas Jefferson. This is 1997. He was the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation Scholar at UVA, and you read his book, he was pissed that he wasn't chosen. He really ripped this documentary to shreds. And it's very easy to see when you read his commentary. It says, why wasn't I chosen? Andrew Burstein, who was a disciple, not a disciple, but a student of Onuf, was chosen. And it says a lot about the impression perhaps the people had of Peter Onuf, that the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation Scholar at UVA was not chosen to be a part of it. So I'll leave that as that.
Okay. Question number 3. What was your largest disappointment with the series?
Can I give largest disappointments? I'll talk about a few.
No, only one. No, I'm joking. Okay, you can talk about however many you can talk about in 10 minutes.
Well, I don't know if it's Clay Jenkinson or Joe Ellis, both of whom, have comment on Jefferson's large intelligence, but they also want to underscore his hypocrisy. I'm so tired of hearing about his hypocrisy because it doesn't exist. He wasn't a hypocrite. I think it was Jenkinson says, talks about these magical words that he wrote in the Declaration. He says these are the essential words of the American creed, and they are. And he says, well, the genius, I think this was Jenkinson, he says Jefferson's genius was to write about these truths at the level of abstraction. So I'm going to talk about liberty and equality as abstract terms, not as concrete terms. In other words, I'll talk about them on paper without concern whether or not they can actually be put into practice, right? He uses the term, his genius was to assert them at a level of abstraction. He talks about them having rhapsodic inspirational quality. We want to believe these truths. He goes, but Jefferson just didn't understand that liberty and equality were not reconcilable. Okay? I massively disagree with that. The premise of this book, The Disease of Liberty, here, is just to show that Jefferson wasn't so stupid. Jefferson understood that, yes, as the commentator said, liberty and abstract inequality are not reconcilable. Not all people are equal in any obvious sense. So instead of just thinking, Thomas Jefferson, you're an idiot. You're a fool. You're taking as compatible terms that are essentially incompatible. I asked the question, and this drives this book, is there a sense in which all humans are equal and deserving of liberty because we are equal? And he says in his first draft of the Declaration that it is from human equality. Because of our human equality, we are deserving of liberty. So the most fundamental principle in the first draft of the Declaration is human equality. Liberty is a derivative concept. It's because we're equal. And in one sense, are we equal? As I tease out in this book, and I go into great detail of how he thought about these concepts, we are all not rationally equal. He thought rationality was divided or divvied out among people very unevenly. Very few people were highly rational. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Right? But we all have equal moral sensibility. And he believed that. He asserted that. He says that of Black people. People.
Could it even be as simple as just because you are born a human, you are deserving of respect and
no,
equality?
because what is it? Jefferson didn't think humans occupied a privileged position in the cosmos with respect to other animals necessarily. David Hume didn't, and other empiricists. So you have to ask the question. You can say that. Not David Kidd, but Thomas Kidd in his recent book on Jefferson, he says, well, we are deserving of liberty because we're all equal in the eyes of God, and God created all humans equally. Well, that doesn't, answer the problem, because Jefferson does not think we were created in the image and likeness of God. He just thinks that would have been a silly proposition. So what is it that humans have that make them deserving of liberty in the political sense, where government non-intervention in our affairs and our ability to do with our lives as we see fit, as long as we don't have others, the sense that we're morally equal? But he goes on to say no one has ever noticed this other than me. In a letter to Adams, he talks about we're the moral equals. We have a moral sense in the same way, in a similar way to other creatures that are social. And if you look at that, so what does he mean? Do bees, do penguins, do certain birds like puffins, do wolves, they have a moral sense? I think Jefferson would say yes. So what is it about the human moral sense that makes people different? I want to go down. That makes humans different from those other animals. And I labored on this question because humans don't have a privileged position. They do in one sense. Only human beings sense. He doesn't talk about knowing God through abstraction, through analogy like David Hume. He says we sense God directly. Doesn't say that about other animals, and I suspect he would probably think other animals. So humans do hold a privileged position, at least on this planet, in the sense that we understand God exists through our senses, like seeing, or we just see God when we look at the universe. And no one's ever noticed that. I think it's pretty cool. Anyways, I do show, and I'll stop sharing here, I do show that liberty and equality are reconcilable. It's because we are moral beings and have some ground level of rationality among us, we're deserving of rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. So he's not a hypocrite. He's not staying at the level of abstraction. Maybe that's how it appears in his declaration. But in other writings, I think you can flesh out, we can reconcile the tension. Mm-hmm. But it's just scholars are intent on showing the guy's a hypocrite. He doesn't know what he's talking about. When you do philosophy, there's something called principle of charity. Do not assume someone like Thomas Jefferson is a complete idiot. Let's assume he knows what he's talking about. There's a way of reconciling the tension. So instead of doing what Ellis does and what Clay Jenkinson does, the guy just, what's going on in his head? He's confused. Jefferson might be just a little bit smarter than Ellis, and a little bit smarter than Jenkinson and a little bit smarter than Holochek. Let's assume he's not so stupid and try to figure out what he meant. That's what I try to do. Okay. They talk about the head and heart letter from Rhea Causeway. And I think Jenkinson says that the moral of that is that human life was just too painful. So Jefferson withdrew from the concrete real world to the abstract world. No evidence. That's what you get from the letter. You completely don't understand the letter. I've got to let my dog out. You can jump go. 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 Anyways,
How did you do that? I didn't see the green door open behind you.
You didn't, because I have a fake background, as you know. It's my study in
I was
Berlin.
waiting for that door to open.
Then they talk about, I don't know who mentioned this, said, you know, if you read the Jefferson, John Adams correspondence, you see that these two people needed each other. I disagree with that vehemently. When you read the correspondence, what you see is John Adams needed Thomas Jefferson, not that Jefferson needed Adams. Jefferson loved and respected his friend, but there are a number of instances where Adams says, you know, I write you 2 or 3 letters and you don't even write me one. And here I am, I've written you 7 letters and I haven't got a response. And Adams even says, you know, if he goes, that's okay, because if you write 7 letters, if I write 7 letters and you won, your letter is so perfect, it's worth it. You know, that's Adams needing Jefferson, not
he
Jefferson.
Was needy.
Another big problem I had is Jefferson lusting after political power. He's a hypocrite because he always says how much he hated politics, but yet when he ran for president against Adams, he wanted to beat Adams' pants off and he wanted to be president. He goes, he lusted, Jenkinson, he lusted after power much more than Adams, yet he did it more craftily. He was quiet about it. So he's a schemer. No, Jefferson didn't like political power. Take him at his word there. He behaved as he did. He ran for president because he was the right person for the office. And at times, you have to do things perhaps that you don't want to do.
Right, for the better of the country.
For the better of the country. Why not just say he's a generous person, giving? Does everybody talk about his largesse, his generosity? Gives his whole life to his state, to his country, to science, and no one thanks him for that. We need to say, thank you, Thomas Jefferson, for all the gifts you left us. Jenkinson said he ran, I think he used 1814 for some reason. He said, well, Jefferson came at a point where he could have freed his slaves. He doesn't tell you what happened at this time where he faced this. He faced this dilemma, do I free my slaves or go on and live the way I'm living? He goes, he chose to buy more Bordeaux and more books and not emancipate his slaves. Show me what's going on at this time where Jefferson talks about, should I free my slaves or should I buy more Bordeaux? This is bullshit.
I just thought of a great answer to that. If we think about 1960 and the civil rights movement and the difficulty that Black Americans had with equality, what would it have been like if they had been free back in Jefferson's time? Do you know how difficult life would have been for them?
Just like it was at the Civil War when Blacks were emancipated, all slaves were emancipated. And very difficult time.
Right. And he was, the way I see it, he gave, there was I don't know. I just, what I want to say.
Anytime there's that one scene in one of my favorite movie of all time, and I generally don't have favorites, and it's Cool Hand Luke. When Dragline runs away in the truck with Luke, a lot of people have seen the movie, and Dragline had a few more months, I guess, to serve in prison. And he jumps in the truck with Luke, and they drive away. And says, Luke, we're gonna go to my place. And we're gonna get ourselves a couple farm girls, and we're gonna live it up. And Luke says, no, I had enough of that. Because you go your way, I'll go mine. And then Dragline go, but Luke, I saw you. You rode right in the truck, and I followed you. He goes, I only had a few more months to do. He says, now I'm gonna, it's gonna be back in prison for a long time. And Luke says, that's fine, just do your own thing. And Dragline goes, but Luke, what am I gonna do now? But I think a lot of the slaves felt the same way. You want to free me? What am I going to do?
Right, right. I think if he had, honestly, truly, from what I've learned about Jefferson since working together with you, I think if he knew that they would be safe, that they would have jobs and a means of supporting themselves and providing for their families, I think if he had those securities, he probably would have freed them.
Well, you can't do that either, because you have so much money tied up in the slaves. Each
Right.
slaves had a value. People say, well, you can't put a value on. I agree with that, but at the time they did. And someone
Right.
who owned 200 slaves, you take, just like it happened in the South after Civil War, you take away the slaves, that business goes, the plantation goes belly up. How many plantations just died after, because people have invested all their money in the slaves, and once you take away the slaves, the plantation cannot survive. The business goes belly up, as it were. The interesting question I'll throw out: did the South need slavery? A lot of people think no. It probably, it was a costly venture for slave owners, because they didn't have to pay slaves anything per se. Sometimes they tipped them and gave them money for extra work, but they had to pay for their health care, right? They had to pay for their food and clothing and their upkeep where they live. Might it not have been cheaper just to bring people on to work the farms and pay them a wage and let them go and take care of themselves? A lot of people, myself included, think slavery might not have been that economically feasible. I'll end it with that. So I just thought there were a lot of problems with Jefferson being a racist, a hypocrite. He needs to sleeve all to free all of his slaves. Otherwise, here's the question I asked. We're running late in time, but these people who criticize Jefferson, what would they have done differently than Jefferson? No one ever says.
Yeah, right.
No one ever says.
Right. Okay, so I can't wait to hear, what are the largest, most pleasant surprises of the series?
Natalie Bober, the historian, and George Will blew me away. I'll start off with Natalie Bober. She was gentle. She had an air of dignity. She answered questions calmly and intelligently. And when addressing the issue of Sally Hemings, this is before the DNA test became, that was done and everything. She just said she found it inconsistent with Jefferson's character. And she went back to a quote from one of Jefferson's grandkids saying that that there's a moral impossibility Jefferson would not have had. And I agree with that. People today want to say that Gordon Reed made a big thing in one of her books saying there are no moral impossibilities. There are some people who behave X, Y, and Z and seem to be the most gentlemanly of people are actually vicious tyrants underneath. That's true in some instances, but when you see certain characteristics coupled with other characteristics like generosity and kindness and courage, the sort of virtues, wisdom, when people have those in abundancy, they tend not to do other things. That's all. So you can't just. It's like Bober said. It's entirely inconceivable to me that Jefferson would have had any concern for having a relationship with Sally Hemings, however cute she was. And George Will blew me away because with his succinctness, his beautiful way of expressing things. He says, what Thomas Jefferson left us was a catechism. He said his declaration was, and this is what we ought to think of today when we have this bullshit 1619 thesis and stuff, trying to undermine what our founders gave us. Will said, rather beautifully, goes, what does it mean to be a Frenchman? Nobody knows. And you can say that of a Russian. I'm Ukrainian. What does it mean to be Ukrainian? What does it mean to be Canadian? What does it mean to be from Britain? He goes, in our country, it's you read the Declaration, you buy into human equality, human freedom, you buy into the principles of the Constitution, you buy into the Declaration, and he says it is a sort of it's a catechism. He says you come here, you're sent to those things, and he says you're in, you're it. I love that. He goes, you're in, you're it. So you can't be, we're a melting pot, and that's a strength. Right. But we do, and we did insist that you come here and learn to speak English, and you buy into the principles articulated in the Declaration. And if you can do that, you can be an American. We have, in my estimation, the greatest story in the history of the world for how our country became our country.
Yes.
Right? Not bloodless. It's the greatest story.
Yeah.
And when we put up crap like the 1619 thesis, what are people really trying to do? Undermining this great story of the great founding men and women.
Mm-hmm.
George Will. And then he said one other thing, and I'll leave this for the last question. He said, what captures Thomas Jefferson, Will says, is that he emphatically said yes to life. And boy, did that hit the nail on the head. Jefferson was so involved with other people, with studying the world, studying the mind of God. Mm-hmm. How more can you say yes to life than to do what he'd been doing? And then, all these other people are trying to rip Jefferson apart. And Will just, I got tingles because I like Will a lot, but he just captured the essence of Thomas Jefferson. He is America. That's what blew me away. Those people, for those of you who haven't watched the video, focus on what Will says when he comes in. He just gets everything right. And Bober's great.
Good. Okay, so take a note on that. The last question: would you recommend this series?
Yeah, with some reservations.
Put a drum roll in there.
Yeah, you can do the drum roll. I mean, yeah, I would. I mean, if you don't know anything about Thomas Jefferson, and if you asked me if I watched this, would I learn about him? I'd say yeah, with the qualifications, is that stay away from the crap on Jefferson's hypocrisy and racism. Right. You want to understand racism, go back to the scientific climate of Jefferson's day and study the issue of race, study the science of race, study the issue of slavery, that Black people were involved in it, that white people were slaves at times. Slavery continues to go on. And there are worse things than slavery. In my research on Russia and Ukraine, I look at when Stalin's day, Stalin would take people from their families, send them to Siberia, or just shoot them outright, take them from their families. And these people sent to the gulags would, in 10 years or 5 years, they would age 30 or 40 years.
Wow.
There are conditions worse than slavery as well. I don't mean to undermine, the evil of slavery. I would recommend it, and I know you didn't get a chance to watch the whole thing, but you're in the process of it. But
oh yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I for the most part, I don't like the duplicity of, he's so great, he's so great, he's so great, and then another person comes on and says, oh, he never saw it fit to free his slaves. Well, yeah. You can't just, that's like nobody, even today, nobody would take their 18-year-old child and say, okay, move out on your 18th birthday. I mean, yeah, some people do that.
Oh, but by the way, before you go, you've got a birthday in the house, right? Your daughter, Antonia.
Yeah.
Got a birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, I'll have to play this for her.
We'll end at that. Next time we're going to have a guest, a star on to talk about, what are we doing? We have another scholar coming on. We're going to look for 1 word, 5 questions, and we're going to look at a particular work of Jefferson. First, it escapes me right now. I got all excited about this video. Anyways, I think that's about all we can say for this. And
yeah. And I'm glad that person suggested that we do this. And please keep your suggestions coming. We will read them and try to accommodate your suggestions.
Very good suggestion, by